Check, check, check.
Hello? 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 Hi, hi, hi.
I'm so happy to see you.
Hi, how are you?
I'm so happy to see you. Whatever you want.
Hi. It was so hot today, I haven't come
What are you
home.
sitting?
Shirley, it was so hot in the house.
This is both.
I thought I was gonna die.
What's my,
Oh, she's not sitting there.
Cece's sitting here. I think it's psychologically difficult to move into it.
You get a massage. You had a great grandson. Is everything all right?
How about your kids?
Oh, I know.
Where did you get it sourced?
Did you take one of these?
told you that, so you wanted to take him to come to me. It's not only 5 o'clock now.
Yeah, session wait.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, but hold on. Sorry. That's okay. Thank you very much.
Oh, you got sheets? Oh, they're getting the sheets? I'm getting it just right now. Thank you so much.
Very good, wow. Very
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. The title of the Shiur today, I think a topic relevant to the Bein HaMitzorim, or between Shivasar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, days that are devoted to mourning over the Churban Beis HaMikdash, and not just the destruction of the temple, but really to commemorate all the tragedies that have occurred to us, to Am Yisrael over the course of generations. And the title of the Shiur is, Are We Still in Golus? And if we're not, what are we in? What is the state that we're in? And there's no question that Golus, for generations, at least until our generation, definitely had two meanings. One meaning was geographical, that somebody who is not in Eretz Yisrael is definitely in Golus, or as Chazal term it, the Golah. However, Golus is also a state of being. And even when Jews are in Eretz Yisrael, they can be in Golus. If you look at source number 5, this is the Medrash Rabbah at the very beginning of Sefer Bereshis, when the Torah talks about V'aretz ha'isa tohu v'vohu, that land was full of confusion and upheaval. Chazal tell us the pasuk is referring not just to before Brias Olam, but even after Brias Olam. And unfortunately, there were nations that came along and caused confusion, caused upheaval, caused destruction. And obviously, it was the Babylonians, and refer to also the Golus of Yavan, the Golus of Greece. And the Golus of Greece, the Jewish people were living, well, a good portion of them, were living in Eretz Yisrael. So there's no question there are times that you can have a Golus, even when Jews are living in Eretz Yisrael. But we have to understand, of course, that when the Golus Yavan happened, the Jews did not have freedom. It was very difficult to keep mitzvos, and Jews had to be moser nefesh, give up their lives for certain mitzvos, where it reached a point where some Jews actually felt it was all over. This world was finished. We should just think about Olam Haba, the future world. So the question is, what about now? Now that we live in Medinas Yisrael, where whatever problems there are, we know that there are certain parts of Eretz Yisrael where Baruch Hashem, a Jew is able to keep mitzvos. A Jew is able to keep Torah mitzvos. He has the ability to. And even though there are certain parts of Eretz Yisrael which we can't, unfortunately, we're not able to live in certain parts of Eretz Yisrael, whether it's the Gaza Strip, or there are certain parts of Yehuda Shomron, certain parts of East Jerusalem that we're not able to do that. We don't feel sometimes safe walking there. Even during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, second temple era, there were times where certain parts of the country were owned, were maintained, were governed by other nations. They speak about, after the Nes Chanukah, the Greeks still were governing certain parts of the country until one of the Malchei Chashmonaim was able to rule over the entire country. So are we in a state right now where we would not refer to those living in Eretz Yisrael as being in Golus, being in exile? Now, the truth be told, I really never thought about this question. And as a matter of fact, as a matter of speech, I would always say, especially Shabbos Hagadol, Shabbos Shuvah, I would say, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should end the Gullus. We should be Zochah the Beis HaMikdash and end the Gullus. And a number of weeks ago, someone challenged me and said to me, how can you say that we're still in Gullus? And I was actually surprised, but I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And not just thinking about it, but when I would bump into somebody, I would say, tell me, one of the questions, are we still in Gullus? That was my introductory question. Rabbanim, Talmidei Chachamim, scholars, are we still in Gullus? Are we still in exile? And I have to tell you that typically I receive three answers. So I would say that for Jews who would like to describe where we're holding today, there are Jews who refer to the time period since the establishment of the State of Israel as Hatzchalta de Geula, the beginning of the redemption. There are Jews who refer to the state we're into a little differently. They call it Ikvasa de Mashiach, the footsteps of Mashiach. Now, Ikvasa de Mashiach is usually mentioned to say, yeah, there are serious problems. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman spoke about pre-European Holocaust, pre-Holocaust Europe, Ikvasa de Mashiach. And then there are Jews who don't know. So if I spoke to a Jew who referred to the state we're in now as the footsteps of Mashiach, they would say, Geula, Gullus? Of course we're in Gullus. And if I speak to Jews who refer to this state as Daschal to the Geula of gain or redemption, they say, of course we're not in Gullus. How can you call it Gullus? But then that being said, certain people said to me, I don't know. And certain people said to me, Yesh v'yesh. They said, listen, we definitely are beginning of the Geula. However, the redemption, it's a process, as the Yerushalmi says. The Yerushalmi says the Geula will be like Ayelas HaShachar, like the morning star, where we start to see something happening. It's getting a little bit lighter, and then dawn, and then sunrise, until the sun comes out in its full glory. So it's a process. It's the Yerushalmi. So, the Gullus has ended, but there are still certain aspects of the Gullus, like a teenager. What's shot in a teenager? What's a teenager? A teenager is very simply that 1 minute you can talk to this teenager and she can act very mature. And the next minute they act like babies. So sometimes we feel like, there's some very special things that are going on. For example, just an example, recently, when UNESCO decided that Hebron does not belong to the Jewish people. They decided. So Benjamin Netanyahu, at a cabinet meeting, put on a kippah, and he read from Parshas Chayim. So someone criticized, how come he took his kippah off? But I think the fact that a prime minister, and not all prime ministers would have done this in our history, can put on a kippah to read from Parshas Chayim, that already is a sign of the Geula, the redemption. And then, unfortunately, some other things happen, The state of Israel makes certain policy decisions that show that maybe we're still in Gullus. It's a process. It's a process. So, and then one person said to me, I'll explain to you, he's a person, so personally, how do I evaluate this era? Ikvasa de Mashiach, Aschalta de Geula, beginning of the redemption. My father referred to this era as the Mafteach LeGeula, the key to the Geula, that we can really open the doors very wide. Unfortunately, you have a key, we can close it, but Baruch Hashem, it looks like the doors are opening wider and wider. I see the Geula unfolding in front of us as we see Eretz Yisrael getting ready to greet the throngs of people that are going to come here when Mashiach comes. However, that's how I see it. So one person who's in my camp, I'll call him, said to me, Gullus, he says, I spent Shabbos in Tel Aviv. It's definitely Gullus there. Okay? Now, what did he mean by that? Not to talk, by the way, and that idea, by the way, can exist anywhere, not just Tel Aviv. What did he mean? So I'd like to try to understand and why. It's important to understand, number one, to know what state we're in. Because let's say, for example, if we believe that we're still in Gullus, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has brought to redemption, where is our Karas HaTov? HaKadosh Baruch Hu has brought so many salvations, and we call it still Gullus? That's one problem. Second of all, it's important to know where we're at in order that we can react properly to react, in order that we can go ahead and we can do what needs to be done in order to bring the complete Geula, in order to bring the Beis HaMikdash. Now, so therefore we have to ask ourselves, what else do we want? What's important to us? Baruch Hashem, most of us are living in Eretz Yisrael. It's a very big schus. And we understand that the quality of life in Eretz Yisrael is so much better, so much more beautiful than the quality of life in Chutz La'aretz, or I would say in Gullus, actually. Okay? He says, however, what are we missing? Why do we want the Beis HaMikdash? What do we need the Beis HaMikdash for? Okay, so it's true. We have a Beis HaMikdash, so we can be Makrav Korbanos. Do we really understand what it means to offer sacrifices? We understand what that means. Okay, it's a mitzvah. But do we really understand what it means? Obviously, there's something that the Beis HaMikdash has that goes beyond the Korbanos. Something that when we're Makrav Korbanos, we offer sacrifices. When we hear the Levim singing the songs on the Dulchan, when we see the Kohanim doing the Avodah, there's something very special that's going to happen. What is that special? So I have to tell you that a number of years ago, I heard a shiur, I'm not going to say from who, and he wanted to suggest, a very big Talmud Chacham, that what makes the Beis HaMikdash special, because we all have our shuls, Baruch Hashem, he says the Beis HaMikdash is special because the temple belongs to every Jew. Everyone has their shul, the temple belongs to every Jew. And I walked away thinking, wow, that's amazing. But after a number of years I thought about it, I don't think that's it. Because if that was it, we could build a shul that belongs to all of Klal Yisrael. As a matter of fact, I'll be very honest with you. The plaza in front of the Kosel Maravi is a shul that belongs to all of Klal Yisrael. And even though there are certain groups that are complaining about this rule and that rule, every place has its rules. The Beis HaMikdash is going to have rules too. And the rules are you have to follow halacha. But the bottom line is, this is a shul that belongs to everybody. There's Kedushas Beis HaKnesset, in the plaza in front of the Kosel. There's a shaila about the plaza beyond. Does it have Kedushas Beis HaKnesset? There's a machlokes, because sometimes on an overflow crowd, they have people davening there. But it belongs to everybody. So I don't think that's what it is. I don't think that's what it is. It has to be something else, and therefore, if it has to be something else, if we really want the Beis HaMikdash, we have to try to think why we want the Beis HaMikdash, and to show by our efforts that we really want the Beis HaMikdash for this reason. And that's where I would like to go with this year. Now, I'd like to start with the Maral.
Majority of mitzvahs depends on the Beis HaMikdash. More than half.
I agree. I said Korbanos, there's no question. But you're right. Okay, that's true. But you know what? I think, as we'll see, the Beis HaMikdash means much more than just mitzvahs that we do. Much more than just mitzvahs that we do. Much more. So, because obviously we can learn about the mitzvahs, but it means much more. And I'd like to see, what does it mean? What does it mean? Because if all we're concerned about is the mitzvos, then we're missing something out. And that's what I'd like to discuss. So before we go there, first I'd like to discuss, are we in Gullus or not? So if you look at source number 1, and I'm not really going to do most of the sources inside, this is for you to look at if you want. The first source is the first chapter of Netzach Yisrael, written by the Maral MiPrague. All right? And the Maral MiPrague says like this. Maral MiPrague says, it is not normal for any nation to be in exile. And he says, not only is it not normal for any nation to be in exile, he said it's not normal for any nation to be scattered. A nation is a family that has to come together as one. And the third point, he says, it's not normal for a nation to be in their land and be governed by somebody else. And he says that is Gullus. Gullus is when the nation cannot be in their land, and even when they're in their land, they are being governed by somebody else. So therefore, according to Maral, there's no question that today we are in Eretz Yisrael. We have a right to do mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael. Okay? We can't speed in the roads. We can't do what we want in general, but we are able to be shomer Torah mitzvos. A person chooses to do that. And therefore, according to the Maral, it's very difficult to say that living in Eretz Yisrael, we are still in Gullus. By the way, it doesn't mean that we don't have to fast on the 4 fast days, the Arbat Somot. It doesn't mean that we still don't have to have a Beilis and the Churban. Of course we do. We'll come to that. But according to the Maral, it's very difficult to go ahead and to say that we're still in Gullus, because we live in Eretz Yisrael. And Baruch Hashem, we keep Shabbos, and Baruch Hashem, we daven, and we're learning, and we're doing mitzvahs ben amal chavera, and we have that choice. And someone might say, well, who's ruling over us? So the bottom line is, during the time of the Bayis Sheni, the Second Temple era, there were also some of the political leaders were probably worse than our political leaders, some of them. And the fact of the matter is that it wasn't called Golus, and they were able to keep mitzvos. And from the Rambam points out from the time of the miracle of Hanukkah until the Churban, and some of those kings were definitely not on the same level as some of our rulers today. There's no question about that. So it's very difficult to say we're in Golus. And in source number 1, I'll just mention quickly, the Maral says that when something not normal happens, so then it has to go back to the way it's supposed to be. For example, if someone goes ahead and digs a hole in the ground, so if the hole does not get filled up with something like water or something else, it's going to get filled up because nature abhors a vacuum. All right, so therefore, there's a vacuum, nature will fill it up. The same thing, if it's normal for us to be in Israel, if it's normal for us to rule over ourselves, and if it's normal for us to have a kibbutz golius to be together, it will happen. Okay, and the truth is, we know that, I don't know if the Maral could have foreseen this, and there's a lot of Jews that still have to come. And we still have to get back part of Eretz Yisrael that we don't have yet. There's no question about that. The Radak says in Parshas, I think, Toldos, that the Eretz Plishtim will get back when Mashiach comes. That's what the Radak says. But there's still a part. But that is something which is normal and has to happen. But Golus is defined as not being, and it could happen, by the way, because the Jews wanted today. The Jews wanted today, whether they're living in the United States, they're living in England, France, all over the world. Maybe there are a few countries. But even in Russia, if Jews wanted today, they could all come back. They could all come back. And just like during the time of the Second Temple, there were Jews not living in Israel, but it wasn't Golus, today also. It can't be Golus because we rule over the land of Israel. And I'll just mention very quickly that the Maral says in Netzach Yisrael, in source number 1, he quotes the pasuk, "Vayomer Hashem al Avram Yodea Teda." Hashem said to Avram, "You should know." And the Medrash says, "Yodea Shanim Efazram." You should know that I'm going to scatter the Jews. Teda, you should know Shanim Ekavsam. I'm going to bring them together. Yodea Shanim Mashkanam. I'm going to make them be possessed by somebody else. I'm going to redeem them. You should know that I'm going to go ahead and enslave them, but then I'm going to redeem them. And he says that the bottom line is that these are the 3 things that are going to happen when we're in Golus. Number 1, we're going to be scattered. Number 2, we're going to be ruled over by somebody else. And number 3, we're going to be exiled. And he says, and the reason why the Medrash specifies all 3, because all these things will revert back to the way they're supposed to be. But according to the Maral, he says that it's very hard to say that we're in Golus. You can't, because we're Hashem, we live in Eretz Yisrael. However, what bothered me about the Maral, we have no Beis HaMikdash. And I always understood about our Beis HaMikdash, we're still in Golus. So if we look at source number 2, it's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, says, Parakei Mishnah Tes, Golus Bola Olam, Golus comes to the world, Al Ode Avodah Zarah, Val Gili Arayas, Val Shvichas Damim. Exile comes to the world because you worship idols, because of incest, adultery, Shvichas Damim, because of murder, Val Shmotas Haaretz, and because we did not keep Shemitah. And the Tiferes Yisrael in source number 3 defines what is Golus. So Tiferes number 1 says, "Hu ha'onesh hayoser kosher sheyuchal lahasik lahalom." He says, if you want to imagine all the punishments mentioned in the Tochecha, all the suffering, he says, so obviously, when we talk about our families, starvation, cherev, swords, all very difficult. But in terms of a national tragedy, the worst that can be is the Golus. And the Tiferes Yisrael learns it out from the Psukim at the end of Sefer Vayikra, Parshas B'chosai, because you look, it's Parak Chavav, source number 4. The Torah is listing off all the things that will happen. He says will happen that, if, for example, if you're going to go ahead and you're going to still sin. So in Pasuk Chavtes, V'achaltem Basar B'neichem, you're going to be so hungry you can eat the flesh of your children, and then I'm going to destroy all your high places. And he says, and then I'm going to make your cities destroyed. Destroy Beis HaMikdash. And the last thing is, V'eschem ezara b'goyim. The last thing mentioned is I'm going to scatter you amongst the Golus. After all the punishments mentioned. Why? Because on a national level, the worst thing for a nation is to be exiled. And that's Tiferes Yisrael. He says, but if you go back number 3, the Tiferes Yisrael says in Parakeh Mishnah Tes, what is it? Sheyechrav hamikdash, the temple will be destroyed. V'sheyiglu habanim me'shulchan avihim, and the children will be exiled from their father's shulchan, and there'll be a mashal shenina b'kerev eretz. Everyone will talk about what happened to the Jewish people. So even though Golus, as the morale defines it, is being exiled, which we're not exiled now, the Tiferes Yisrael mentions that there's still something about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. However, during the time of the beginning of the time of the Second Temple, when the Jewish people came back and didn't build the Beis Hamikdash yet, it was difficult to say they were in Golus then also. But there's something about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And before I go on, I want to point out that even though we're not in Golus, according to the Maral, we still have to mourn. And we still have to keep the fast days, whether it's Tisha B'Av, Shivas B'Tammuz, Asar B'Teves, and Tzom Gedalia. How do I know that? So there's a Mishnah in Masechת Rosh Hashanah, source number 6. And today we want to know when a holiday is going to be. So what we do is we go ahead and we look at our calendar. It's very simple. Back in the days of the Beis Hamikdash, of the temple, post-temple, when there would be Mekadesh the Chodesh al Piriyah, they would wait for the Eidim who would see the new moon, and they had to go ahead and they go to Bezdin, and no one knew more than a month in advance what's going to be with that month. Is the previous month going to be 30 days, 29 days? They didn't know, and therefore they would have to send out messengers to all of Israel and all of the Golah in order to let people know when Rosh Chodesh was. So most months it wasn't a problem. In other words, okay, Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, we didn't know when Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan was. It wasn't a big deal. Shabbos is still Shabbos. Rosh Chodesh Teves, we didn't know. It wasn't a big deal. Rosh Chodesh Shvat, it really wasn't a day, he says. However, there are certain months where you had to know. Rosh Chodesh, he says, and what were those months? Obviously the months where there were holidays. Nisan, because of Pesach. Tisha B'Av, because of Chodesh Av, because of Tisha B'Av. Elul, so you know Rosh Hashanah is, and Chodesh Tishrei, of course, and Kislev, because of Chanukah. No one to celebrate the holidays. The Bezdin did not send out messengers every single month, because the budget cuts. What does that mean? They didn't have the budget to send messengers out. So only those months were absolutely necessary. So the 1 month they sent out was Chodesh Av. Why? Because you have to know when to commemorate Tisha B'Av. So the Gemara asks, and how about Tammuz? Shivas B'Tammuz? How about Teves, Asar B'Teves? How about those fast days? So the Gemara says, very simply, that they didn't always commemorate those fast days. What does that mean? When the Jewish people came back to Eretz Yisrael after Golus Bavel, and when they came back after Golus Bavel and they rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash, or they're going to rebuild it, they knew the temple would not be the same temple. As a matter of fact, at the time of the consecration of the Second Temple, there were those who cried, who remembered the First Temple. They knew. And the question is, do we go ahead? And do we mourn? Do we cry on these fast days? They asked the Nevi'im. And the Nevi'im came back with a response from God. It depends. If it's a time of shalom, of peace, then it should be sasa v'simcha. It should be a time of rejoicing. Because why? There's nothing to be sad about. You have a Beis Hamikdash now. It's a time of shalom, of peace. If it's a time of there's no peace, we'll speak about that in a minute. But, there's really no gzeros, there's no evil decrees. You can do what you want. And if it's a time where there are evil decrees against the Jewish people, then you have to fast all those fast days. So I first want to explain how the Ramban explains this Gemara. Then I'll come to the Rambam. And there's an important reason why I'm doing it this way. Ramban says very simply, he says, if it's a time of shalom, the time when, there's a Beis Hamikdash, and there's peace, and everyone's doing really well, Sasim v'simcha should be rejoicing. If it's a time when there's not necessarily shalom, there might be a Beis Hamikdash, but things aren't going so well, but things aren't that bad, you can do what you want. And if it's a time where there are gzeros, evil decrees against you, then you should fast. The Ramban says that really all 4 fast days have to be like Tisha B'Av. All 4 fast days, 24 hours, no shoes, no washing, no anointing. The only thing is, when do we have to keep all 4 fast days like Tisha B'Av? That's when it's a time of Ein Shalom, there's no peace, and there are Gzeros. There are Gzeros. But in general, we don't have times of Gzeros, and therefore, just as a day of tshuva, so 3 fast days, we only fast during the day, and Tisha B'Av we fast for 24 hours. That's the Ramban Shita. However, according to Ramban, it should seem that during certain times in our history, we should have fasted 24 hours. For example, during the Holocaust. The time of the Holocaust was definitely, for Jews in America, for Jews in England who understood what was going on, they should have fasted 24 hours. And my father told me there were Yechidei Skula who would fast 24 hours on all 4 fast days during it once the Jews understood what was going on. They would fast. But in general, we don't pass like the Ramban. We don't pass like the Ramban because we didn't fast 24, it wasn't accepted to fast 24 hours when there was a time of Gzerah. However, we probably pass like the Rambam. The Rambam says like this. The Rambam says something amazing. He says, Shalom, you know what Shalom is? Shalom is not now. Shalom, he says, is Bisman Mashiach. Because even when there was a second Beis HaMikdash, there were still challenges, still problems. So there's no sason v'simcha, no rejoicing on these fast days during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. It says the time of second Beis HaMikdash when there was Ein Shalom the Ein Gzeros. What does it mean Ein Gzeros? If there's no Beis HaMikdash, that's a Gzera. In other words, Ein Gzera means there's a Beis HaMikdash. He says, but if there's no Beis HaMikdash, he says, according to the Rambam, that's a Gzera Ra. So according to the Rambam, he says, when there was, during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, that was Ein Shalom, because there were still problems. But it was Ein Gzeros because it was a Beis HaMikdash, according to the Rambam. However, after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, then it's Yesh Gzeros. There are decrees because there's no Beis HaMikdash. So according to the Rambam, we have to fast all 4 fast days. However, only Tisha B'Av is 24 hours. And the Rambam says that during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, they still fasted on Tisha B'Av. They still fasted on Tisha B'Av, even at the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. And Rambam says that's why the Mishnah mentions that they sent messengers out during Chodesh Av, because they had to fast during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. If you look at the Rambam, it's source number 7. The Rambam says, they didn't fast on the 10th. They didn't fast on the 10th of Teves, not the 7th of Tammuz. Ela Rotze Yisana, those who wanted to fast could, because it was a time of Ein Shalom. There wasn't total peace. He says, but there was an Ein Gzeros, because there wasn't Beis HaMikdash, Oshi Yisana, and therefore they didn't send Shlichim out for Teves and Tammuz. And he quotes the pasuk. It was in their choice. But the very end, the Rambam says, at the very last line, number 7, while Yusanim Tisha B'Av, he says, they would fast on Tisha B'Av, Afal Pi, even though Shumosl Ritzon, even though they didn't have to fast, they fasted. Why? Because it was Tisha B'Av. And it was a time of Ein Shalom because it wasn't perfect. He says, and therefore they decided to fast Tisha B'Av because Tisha B'Av, Huchpalot Saras, there were so many tragedies that were connected to each other. The Churban Bayis Rishon, destruction of the first temple, the Gzeira, the Meraglim, that the spot after the Jews would all die in the Midbar, and at that time it was decreed the temple would be destroyed. They fasted Tisha B'Av because according to the Rambam, it was a time of it wasn't Gzeros, because it wasn't the Beis HaMikdash, but it wasn't Shalom, it was perfect. According to the Rambam, when will there be Shalom? You look at source number 8. The Rambam says in Hilchas Tainis Perek Hey, Kol Hatzomos Se'elu Asin Li Batel Mos Mashiach. When will these fasts become batal? When the Mashiach comes. Not when there's a Beis HaMikdash, when Mashiach comes. Below Ode, he says, El Hashem Asidim, in that time they will become Yom Tovim Veisason V'Simcha, joyous days. And he says, Ko Amar Hashem Tzvakos, Tzom Revi, Tzom Chamishi, Tzom Shvi, Tzom Asiri, Yilabeis Yehuda L'Sason L'Simcha, U'Lamuadim Tovim. And then the Rambam finishes off quoting under the pasuk, for Emes V'Shalom Ahavu, love, truth, and peace. And my grandfather Moshe Soloveichik explained, why does the Rambam feel necessary to add these words? Because you have to understand, what is real Shalom? That's only when there's emes combined. And even during the time of the Bayis Sheni, when we had a Beis HaMikdash, it wasn't true Shalom. But according to the Rambam, even though, as I said, like the morale, the goal, we're not in Golus, we still have to mourn. Just like during the time of the Bayis Sheni, they still had Tisha B'Av. Today we don't have Tisha B'Av, and according to the Rambam, there's no Beis HaMikdash. You have to fast all 4 fast days. 3 fast days during the day, Tisha B'Av 24 hours. But why did they fast? Because it wasn't a complete Binyan Beis HaMikdash. It wasn't complete. That will happen. The Shalom only be Mos HaMashiach. All right, so I think we're not in Golus, but there's still what to mourn about. There's still what to do tshuva, because we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, and the Beis HaMikdash will come, and Mirz Hashem, soon after, Mirz Hashem, along with that, at least according to Rambam, will be the Beis HaMashiach. But what is the Beis HaMikdash? Why do we want the Beis HaMikdash besides the mitzvos? And I hear the mitzvos. Why do we want the Beis HaMikdash? So the Gemara in Masechah Shabbos, Daf Lamed Gimel Aleph, discusses why was the Beis HaMikdash destroyed. And even though the Gemara in Yuma discusses the reasons why the second time was destroyed, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Gemara in Shabbos focuses on the reasons of the first Beis HaMikdash. They do not mention the second Beis HaMikdash because of Sinas Chinam. And the Gemara says in Masechah Shabbos, Daf Lamed Gimel Aleph, Va'avon shvichas damim Beis HaMikdash charev. Because of the sin of shvichas damim, the temple will be destroyed. Ushchina mistalekes mi Yisrael, and the Shechina will be removed from Klal Yisrael. And the Gemara quotes certain psukim. And then the Gemara goes on. Va'avon gili arayis, the end of the second line of source number 9, because of the sin of adultery, incest, v'avodah kachavim, and idolatry, v'ashmata shmita and yovlos, and not keeping shmita and yovel, golus bala olam. What's going to happen? Exile will come to the world. He says, and Megalan also, he says, and will be exiled, uva and acherim, and not just will be exiled, but others will come, the Yoshim ben Komam, and stay here. And even though they really have not been so successful throughout the Golus that other nations should come, there were nations that were living here. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, and then the Gemara says, and please proof why these Averas bring the Golus. And at the very end of source number 9, Gemara says, Ba'avo nivlos peh, soros rabos. After talking about the Golus, which is the greatest national tragedy, Gemara talks about profanity. Soros rabos, gzeros kadosh, kadosh mischachos. What sort of seems to saying, you think that you went to Golus and that's it? I want you to know, the Gemara says, if you're going to speak in a profane manner, an inappropriate manner, it's going to bring Zeros Kosh, very harsh decrees. He says, and unfortunately, many Jews will suffer terribly because of that. So, what I'd like to do, number 1, is to understand what's the significance of these 3 sins. And number 2, to understand why the Gemara feels necessary to talk about, after speaking about the great national tragedy, the sin of nivel peh, of speaking in profanity in an inappropriate manner. Now, before I move on, I just have to mention, even though according to the Maral, we might not be in Golus living in Eretz Yisrael, there's no question, there's something called the Galusa de Shechinta, that the Shechina is definitely in Golus. There's no question about that. As a matter of fact, there's a medrash in Eicha Rabbah. Don't really understand the medrash so much, but the simple meaning is clear. That, as the Shechina began to depart from the Beis HaMikdash, the Medrash lists off the steps it took from one kruf to another kruf, to the Mizbeach, to the roof of the Beis HaMikdash, and then it stood in the Harazeisim for 3.5 years. I don't know what that means. I really don't know. Right? You probably need a whole shiur to learn about that. Okay? However, the Shechina is in Golus. That's the bottom line. All right? And what does it mean the Shechina is in Golus? When the Shechina is in Golus, that definitely affects us also. Why do I say that? There's a very strange Gemara, Masechah Shabbos, in the 5th parak. That's source number 10. I have quoted here, not the Gemara itself, but the Ayin Ayo from Rav Kook. And I'm not going to go through the whole piece inside. You can look at it. And the Gemara talks about Vichal Moshe, that after Jewish people went ahead and the Jewish people sinned the Shivas B'Tama with the Egel, Moshe beseeched HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Gemara is bothered, what does Vayichal Moshe mean? And one opinion, the Gemara seems to say something which we could never say. But Moshe Rabbeinu made Kaviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu sick. What does that mean? What is how can you talk like that? And Rav Kook explains something very, very beautifully. Rav Kook says that when the Jewish people sinned and they came down from their high level, the way things should have happened was like HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. He should have destroyed us and then started over again. But what happened? Moshe Rabbeinu begged. Moshe Rabbeinu davened. He beseeched. He was crying. Finally Hashem said, okay, but I want you to understand, Moshe Rabbeinu, it's not going to be simple. The Jewish people are going to have to suffer in order to learn their mistake and correct their mistake. And when the Jewish people suffer in order to learn their mistake, it's a reflection on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because we are God's people. So when we have a churban, when we have a tragedy, it reflects on God, and that's the Chilul Hashem that happens when we suffer, by the way. When we suffer. And therefore, he says, it appeared like HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol was sick. That's what Rav Kook explains. So there's no question. There's the Shechinta Begalusa. So we might not be in Golas, but the Shekhinah is in Golas. And when the Shekhinah is in Golas, we're affected by it. Because everything that happens to Am Yisrael is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to learn. He wants to bring us back. And that somehow or another, in the eyes of the Umos, nations of the world, seems to say something about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that maybe there's something wrong, because what's supposed to happen isn't happening. So the Shekhinah, so how do we change it? I'll just say one more Gemara. There's also an interesting Gemara that says that the Shekhinah right now is in the coastal Maravi. As a matter of fact, the Radvaz, a few hundred years ago, wrote a very interesting tshuva. He asked the question, he said, let's say there's a Jew who has to go on Har HaBayis to do work. Hey, in his days, I don't think anybody went on Har HaBayis. He has to do work. And it's time for Mincha, and he's on the Har HaBayis. He had to go. Should he face the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Because that's what he's supposed to face. Or should he face the coastal Moravi? Because the Shekhinah is in the coastal. And he says, he doesn't know what that means, but you have to face the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's basically said. But there's something that Shekhinah Begalusa. So the question is, and what that means, the Shekhinah Begalusa is, we said, is the Shekhinah cannot do for us, or doesn't do for us, what it's supposed to. So what's it supposed to do for us? Because if we want a Beis HaMikdash, what we're saying is we want the Shekhinah to do for us what it's supposed to do. And that, by the way, is what the point of the mitzvos are. Because when we do the mitzvos, so that causes the Shekhinah to give off its bounty and do for us what's due for us. So what is the Shekhinah supposed to do for us? And I think in order to understand what the Shekhinah is supposed to do for us, we have to again look at what Rav Kook says on this Gemara about the Averos that caused the Churban Bayis Rishon, destruction of this first temple, and the Golus. And Rav Kook says like this. He says the point of the Beis HaMikdash, whether it's for Jews or for non-Jews, and Shlomo HaMelech said when he built the Beis HaMikdash that even a non-Jew can come to the Beis HaMikdash. It's even for them on some level. The point of the Beis HaMikdash is that we as Jews can come to the Beis HaMikdash. We can have histapkus, we can cling to the Shekhinah, and we can be uplifted as a nation. And then when we're uplifted as a nation, it says, we can go ahead and we can inspire and bring the whole world up with us. That's the point of the Beis HaMikdash. And Rav Kook says when there is Shvichas Damim, on a national level, when Shvichas Damim is rampant and there really isn't an appreciation for the quality of life, how will the Ummah, all nations of the world, look at us as a nation, as a model to bring them up? When we have become so corrupt, we don't understand what the value of life. That we're not taken aback when we see murder. It doesn't bother us. How can we go ahead? And how can we lift up the nation? The nation says, look at the Jewish people. What are they? They're not an example for us. And therefore, there's no point to the Beis HaMikdash. And in the next Gemara, Rav Kook goes on about Gilead Rice and Shvichas Damim with the same idea. What's the idea? The idea is the point of the Jews having a Beis HaMikdash, living in Eretz Yisrael. And he points out living in Eretz Yisrael, as much as we get out of it, without a temple, we're missing something. We're missing something about a temple. We're missing something. And he says, do we have the right values? Are we trying to lift ourselves up? It says, and what does it mean, Gilei Arayos? It means that we don't have family values. He says the bottom line is that in order to be uplifted as a nation, it all begins at home. We have to have right family values. That's Gilei Arayos. And therefore, when the Jewish people don't have those values, the only way to bring them back is to send them out of Israel. For them to realize there's something wrong. For them to look and see there's another nation. Why were we thrown out? To bring ourselves up. And that's a problem. Because when we submit ourselves to modern Western values only, maybe, we're sort of distancing ourselves from the vision of the Beis HaMikdash. Because it's supposed to bring us up. And Avodah Zarah, I don't think it's on the sheet, but Avodah Zarah, Cook says, a person who worships Avodah Zarah, that symbolizes a person who has reached the lowest moral level. What is Avodah Zarah? You know, one of the examples of Avodah Zarah the Jews worshipped was the Peor. What's the Peor? Peor, the Chazal tell us, is they used to go in front of the idol and defecate in front of the idol. That was what does that mean? It means giving into. Obviously, you have to go to the washroom. But we know when we go to the washroom, we have to go, and we have to be private about it. But giving into your natural instincts for whatever you want. And when a person gives into his natural instincts, whatever he wants, so then he's not bringing himself up. And what happened was the Jews were showing at that time that they weren't interested in bringing themselves up. And similarly also bringing themselves up. They're involved in shvichas damim, idolatry, not realizing the greatness of family values, bringing it back to what's important, avodah zarah. They weren't interested in that, bringing themselves up. And for that reason, they didn't need a Beis HaMikdash. They had to be sent out of Eretz Yisrael, somehow to relearn of what their role in life is, about to understand what they have to aspire to. And if Cook says that, you should know that sometimes you can be so low, you can even come back, and maybe it won't work. As, by the way, it happened. They came back, and they couldn't be together as one nation. They didn't have the aspiration of getting along with each other. What's Rav Kook? I think Rav Kook is saying like this. The Vilna Gaon is very famous for saying that there are three types of sins. We all know, everyone knows, there's mitzvos ben l'makom, the haveros ben l'makom. If I don't put on tefillin, I don't keep Shabbos, I violated a sin between me and my Creator. There's mitzvah l'chavero. If I steal, I tell lashon hara. I am not careful about how to treat my friend. But there's a third category, and that category is called mitzvos bein adam la'atzmo. What does that mean? In terms of being a human being. In other words, are you careful to make sure you act in a dignified manner, whether it's in front of people or it's by yourself? Gemara says, I believe in Bava Kama, that if a person wants to be a chassid, how do you want, not a chassid in the modern term, but, I think that Rav Chayim, in his Sefer, they refer to Rav Chayim as a chassid and as a gaon. So my uncle pointed out that his two brothers, that his brother of Shmuel Yaakov has the gaonist of Rav Chayim, and his brother Reb Aaron had the Chasidus of Reb Chaim. What does it mean to be a chassid? So Gemara says, you want to be a chassid? Learn Nezikin. Learn Milad and Nezikin. How not to damage somebody. You want to be a chassid? Learn Milad the Brachas. How to say the Brachas properly. You want to be a chassid? Learn Meseches Avos. What does that mean? There to be a chassid in three areas. One area is a chassid ben olam makom. So I want to be a chassid ben olam makom. Say brachas properly. Recognize the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So I'll learn Milah the brachas. If I want to be a chassid ben adam lachavero, learn nezikin, how not to damage somebody. But if I want to be a chassid, I want to be a chassid in the area of ben adam ben olam atzmo. I have to learn Meseches Avos. They tell a story about a certain Gaon. I don't want to say who it is. From 2 generations ago, that one time, he was a very good boy. So someone suggested a shidduch of a certain girl. And the girl said she was very progressive. Before she meets him, she wants to see him first. Today, you just send a picture. I want to see him first. So, it's okay. So she decided they told him, during this time of day, he eats lunch, right? Go ahead and watch him eating lunch. She came to the window, and as he was eating, I guess the story is pasta. He was eating with his fingers. Now remember, in those days, eating with your fingers was not as socially unacceptable as it is today. So she says, forget it, I'm not interested. Anyway, this Talmud Mitsuyan became one of the Gaonei Gedolei Hador. I don't want to mention his name. I guarantee you, a few years later in life, he wasn't eating with fingers anymore, all right? And then, he got married, she got married, and then I guess his wife died, or he had children, a family was older, her husband died, and she said to him, she sent a message, I wasn't zochet to zivug rishon, I want zivug sheni. And he said no, okay? Again, I don't know, but what does that mean? Why am I telling this story? I'm telling this story is because, if a person goes ahead and would never eat, let's say, for example, can you imagine if you would go in and see somebody who's eating yogurt? Okay, yogurt. And he's using his fingers eating yogurt. Let's imagine, like, oh my gosh, what's going on here, right? So I don't think I would ever eat yogurt with my fingers, all right? I have to tell you, I wouldn't eat yogurt with my fingers even in the privacy of my own kitchen. Because in general, what's considered a level of humanity today is you don't eat that way. Or there's halachas of how you dress, how you walk around your house. There's been adam la'atzmo. In other words, a person has to lift himself up. He has to aspire to be on the highest level of humanity. And that is in all three areas. And that is why we want a Beis HaMikdash. When the Jewish people sinned because of Avodah Zarah, shvichas damim, murder, adultery, they showed that they weren't aspiring to be on the highest level. And they were showing they didn't want the Beis HaMikdash, because the ultimate point of the Beis HaMikdash, of all their karbanos, it was when you come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is to raise yourself up. And that's actually what we aspire to. The pasuk in Micha, Perek Vav, pasuk Ches, tells us, Higid la'adam ma'tov, tell a person what's good, what Hashem wants from him. Kim osim mishpat va'avas chesed, v'yeresa Hashem l'kecha. It says, what does it mean? Do mishpat. You should go ahead and be a proper human being. You should love to do chesed to people, and also be in awe. Be in awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I think that, yes, it's difficult to say that we're not in that we're in Galus. We live in Eretz Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, with the freedom to keep mitzvahs. However, according to the Rambam, there's still a lot to mourn for. What does it mean, yesh v'yesh? We don't have a Beis HaMikdash, but it's beyond the Beis HaMikdash. We don't have the opportunity to be uplifted, to be that nation that it can inspire the world. We don't have opportunity, and that will come ultimately with Beis HaMikdash. And if Cook adds in, I forgot to mention, how about Shemitah? Why did not keeping Shemitah bring the Gullus? Because he says that a lot of times in a nation, sometimes we come up with certain ideas, and ideas that are crooked ideas, that are perverse. And we need time to just focus and think about it when we're not pressured with day-to-day activities. And that's what Shemitah was for, to give a chance, especially in those days in our cultural society, to get back and think. When you're not pressured down by the everyday activities of work, to think about what our attitude should be, what our focus should be, to bring us up. And the Jews showed they weren't interested. And, we're definitely on the right path. And I think that what we have to do, and everybody knows, or to think, that we have to work on raising ourselves up. Whether it's in terms of, the proper Torah values, whether it's in terms of how to go ahead and act, in a dignified manner, in terms of how we deal with others and towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because that's why we really have a Beis HaMikdash, to be uplifted. And for and talk, you came to the Beis HaMikdash, you were a different person. How it happened, I have no clue. I have no idea. But there's something about all those mitzvahs that brought us up, something. And I think that besides davening for a Beis HaMikdash, which we should all do, besides davening that all our challenges should end on a national level, besides davening that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should somehow, convince in a pleasant way the Jews all over the world to come back to Eretz Yisrael, we should also work on ourselves to bring ourselves up, to uplift ourselves. Because if we work on uplifting ourselves, we're showing we want to be uplifted, we want to be a model for the nations, and then we're showing we want to base on Mikdash. Because ultimately, the point of the base of Mikdash lifts ourselves up to become better people, and if we show that that's what we want, hopefully HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring the complete Geula. And we won't say, well, here I felt the gullus, because everyone's trying to work on themselves and bring themselves up. And that, Mirz Hashem, will bring the Beis HaMikdash and give everyone an opportunity to always keep growing and be the nation that inspires the world to bring themselves up also. Mirz Hashem, we should see the Geula Shlema this year.
Amen.